So, the Fujifilm X100VI, is it really worth the hype? After 2 months with the most talked about camera in a long time, my answer is not what you would expect. Actually, it is complicated because I went from some initial frustration, especially constantly comparing it to cameras I have, to something I actually didn't see coming. On a recent trip, I packed this and my Sony a6700, which is the camera I'm shooting with, and that one barely left the room. So in this video, let me break down that journey. I'm going to share my honest and unfiltered verdict, and with that, I'll help you decide if you are on the fence about getting this camera. Let's start with the bad because my first days with the X100VI were actually shadowed by frustration. The ergonomics for me were a bit of a learning curve, especially coming from the minimalist grip of the Ricoh GR3, and let's not lie to ourselves, the Ricoh GR3 is not the best in ergonomics either, but compared to it, my fingers felt a bit clumsy over here. Maybe it is that I was just too used to the Ricoh GR by this point, because I've had it since pretty much it launched. But anyway, what happened was that I was constantly pressing on the front function button by accident, sometimes even ruining my shots. My fingers would also creep into the viewfinder, which is a problem I didn't have with the Ricoh, of course because the Ricoh doesn't even have a viewfinder. And on the other hand, the control dials, which are a celebrated feature, felt a little bit too easy to knock out of place, especially that exposure compensation one. The biggest hurdle, on the other hand, was the autofocus. And let's be clear, I was used to the autofocus on the Sony a6700, and that autofocus is just on a different league. It's faster, it's smarter, and it's just decisively more accurate. Sony's AI-powered tracking just works. You don't even have to think about it. So in those first few days, the X100VI felt a little bit behind and made me second guess my decision of getting it. And I also tried to use its face and eye autofocus, but that was also a little bit of a gamble. So sometimes it worked and some other times it would just ignore the subject that was actually in front of the camera. And as I said, I was starting to think that I made an expensive mistake. So what changed then? It was actually not one specific moment, but actually it changed over time, and it was quite simple. I was just trying to use the X100VI like I was using my Sony, and that I realized was the wrong approach. This camera is not necessarily built to be the spec monster that the Sony a6700 is, or by any account any other Sony to be honest. It's just built for a different purpose. For me, the actual turning point came in when I started ignoring the autofocus and started embracing the experience that the camera provides, which is a bit more tactile, let's say. Because given that you don't have a smart autofocus on this camera, it actually forces you to slow down a little bit, which actually I needed. Setting up the aperture, the shutter speed and the ISO, all with dedicated physical controls, reconnected me with the process of taking photos in a different way, something that the menus cannot really accomplish. Is this the most efficient way of doing things? Probably not. But if this is a fun way of doing things, yeah, of course. It felt like shooting with an old film camera but with the benefits of modern technology. And then of course we have the image quality, because that 40 megapixel sensor is just phenomenal. It delivers a great amount of detail, giving you so much flexibility to crop. And yes, of course it's a fixed lens, but the ability to crop now makes sense because it gives you a surprising amount of reach, unlike for example the Ricoh GR3 or the GR4 for that matter. But let's be honest, when people look for Fujifilm cameras, they are not necessarily only looking for a sensor, they are looking for the color science. This is actually where the camera won me over, because the film simulations are just on another level. Coming from the Sony camera, where I almost exclusively shot RAW and then spent a lot of time color grading, the JPEGs from the Fujifilm were eye-opening. Because, especially for a fun trip, you don't really want to have homework and have to edit so many pictures after that trip, and then exporting and then everything that comes after. It's just a chore. And yes, of course, if you want, you can also edit your pictures from the Fujifilm in Lightroom. I myself bring my JPEGs into Lightroom and make small corrections. In fact, another thing that I do, especially when I'm shooting black and white, is shoot JPEG plus RAW, and then I make sure I publish the black and white photo, and if I ever want the photo in color, then I'll have the RAW for that. The fun factor here is knowing that you will have amazing images as soon as you press the shutter. So back to the story of my trip, I packed my a6700 with my travel lens, which is the Sigma 17 to 40mm, which I actually got thinking that it was gonna be the lens that was gonna stay attached to my camera throughout the trip. And don't get me wrong, it's an amazing lens, and in fact it does stay attached to my camera all the time, but maybe not necessarily for a fun trip like that one. In fact, that combination of Sony plus Sigma lens is what I'm using right now to record this video. If you're interested in that lens, you can check the description where I'm putting all the links for all of the products I'm talking about. Those are all affiliate links that help the channel quite a lot, and also you can scan the QR codes that I'm putting on the top corner as well. But continuing with the story, it turns out that I also packed my X100VI, and by the end of the first day, the Sony was already gathering dust. From that point on, I pretty much didn't look back on that trip. I just use the X100VI for almost everything, and here's why. First of all, portability and practicality. The Sony is a workhorse, but it's still a camera with a lens attached, and this makes it bulkier, especially if you're attaching the lens that I attached. And yes, you can use it with smaller lenses, such as the Sony pancake lens that I've mentioned many times in different videos, but at some point you start compromising quality, and nonetheless, still the camera will be a little bit too big in my opinion. The X100 Mark VI at 521 grams is just effortless to carry all day, and I did that by using one of my Peak Design slings, the slide to be more precise. By the way, I also made a video about the travel accessories of the X100VI, especially the ones that I used on that trip and never left the camera, so you can check it over here. Another thing I realized is how much I appreciated its non-extending lens design, especially when I compared it to my travels with the Ricoh, because the one thing I was always a little bit paranoid about was that dust issue that the Ricohs always suffer from, which is basically given that they have moving parts on the lens barrel, it can attract some dust inside of the camera and therefore messing up with the sensor. With the Fuji, it's just ready to go because you can just put it in a bag, you can put it in a pocket of a coat without a second thought. Emphasis here on a coat pocket because it's not truly a pocketable camera, regardless of what some people say. In any case, it is a small detail, but it's actually removing friction from my creative process, and that's very important. The second point is the unexpected capabilities of the camera because its in-body stabilization is just great. Fujifilm claims up to 6 stops of stabilization, which will allow you to get great handheld shots even at very slow shutter speeds. This completely opens up low-light photography without needing a tripod. And now, you can also compare this to the Ricoh GR4, for example, when there is also an improvement in low-light performance, especially compared to the GR3. And by the way, I made a video comparing the Ricoh GR3 and the Ricoh GR4, and you can check it over here. And the one thing that for me is super important even till now is the built-in 4-stop ND filter. Because with this you will be able to shoot even wide open at f2 in bright sun and still get a little bit of subject separation, which will prevent you from carrying yet more accessories such an ND filter with you, because it's always in the camera. And yet another thing that you don't have to be carrying with you at all times, since it's already in the camera, is that flash, and it's very capable and it's already built in. Actually, many times I found myself taking pictures with flash just because of the old school look that it gives. So when you put the A6700 compared to the X100VI head-to-head, in autofocus performance and video performance, yes, the Sony wins, but the Fujifilm is a more fun experience in my opinion. And well, it can also be that I'm still in the honeymoon period because it's only been 2 months with the camera, and maybe in 6 months we'll check again and I'm back to using the Sony for everything. But to see that, we'll have to check back in 6 months. So far, the Fuji has been fun to use. It's just a camera that makes you want to go out and shoot. So after these 2 months, do I regret buying the Fujifilm X100VI? Absolutely not. And to answer the question, was it worth it for me? For sure it was. I really love it. But let's say it's not a camera for everyone. This is a camera that I also started to use in a part of the journey when I needed to fall back in love with the process. And it actually accomplished that beautifully. It is for someone who's a hobbyist, who wants professional grade images without actually adding more complexity to their lives, because who wants more complexity, right? We'll have enough problems. And at the same time, it's a camera for the professional who needs a second camera for personal projects or travel, because it's a camera that feels less than work and more like play. So the question is, should I keep the camera? And this one's very important because it's not cheap. In fact, it's not even easy to get. And let's say if your primary income depends on capturing fast-moving subjects with super autofocus accuracy, like weddings, sports, wildlife, it may not be the camera for you, at least not the main one. As I mentioned, the autofocus, while improved compared to previous versions of this camera, it is its biggest weakness. And on the other hand, if you're a dedicated videographer, you also should be looking elsewhere. And don't get me wrong, the videos in this camera are quite decent, but if you're a professional, then probably you'll be looking to the FX line of Sony cameras. And last but not least, if you're an anxious photographer that wants all of the flexibility in the world and not a bit pressured by just having one focal length at all time, then probably you will go for interchangeable lens camera, which by the way, I've heard wonders about the Fuji X-C5, so consider that as an option. My journey with the Fuji has been one of bringing me back to basics, slowing down, and let's say recalibrating my own expectations. I came in expecting a smaller version of my Sony, although I did my research before, but it is inevitable not to have expectations coming from such an advanced camera, and I was met with a little bit of frustration, as I mentioned. Once I actually understood what this camera is truly about, it didn't only make me happy about getting it, but actually exceeded the hype, which made me go to the next step of the process, which is accessories for it. So if you're interested in knowing which travel accessories are the ones that never left my camera when I was using it during a trip, then you can have a look at the video over here. So that was my story. Now I want to hear yours. Is the Fujifilm X100VI worth it for you? Do you have it already? Are you planning to get it? Do you have a Sony? Do you have a Ricoh? Tell me in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. I'm going to share the phenomenal 17 to 40 milliliters.